Hi class, I hope that you're each doing well. Welcome to our video on social psychology where you're going to be learning about persuasion and the elaboration likelihood model. So in this video, you're going to be learning about persuasion and in particular something called the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion. The elaboration likelihood model describes how we might be able to persuade people based upon the way that people are predisposed to thinking about the argument that we're presenting. So when you're trying to persuade people, you're going to give them some information, some sort of argument. And this model suggests that this can occur through two different pathways. One is the central route and the other is the peripheral route. So let's look at each. Let's say that you have a persuasive message. Sometimes people are motivated to pay attention to the argument that you're trying to make. In that case, you're going to use the central route. Let's say that you're going to buy a vacuum, and so you're going to pay attention to how good the suction is, and does it pick up pet hair? That kind of message needs to include the information that's important to you, that you want to consider in being persuaded to buy this particular vacuum. Central route arguments are going to be used when the audience is motivated. They're going to pay attention. They're going to use a lot of effort in how they process the information. And that type of persuasion leads to a lasting effort in the attitude change. Sometimes messages are not messages that we're very motivated about. So you're watching television and someone wants you to buy a particular perfume or cologne. So you're not that motivated to think about the chemicals or dyes that are in the perfume. Those things aren't on your mind, and so you're not thinking about central route messaging. And you'll notice that this type of message doesn't have a lot of content. You're not thinking about it, so instead there's a lot of beautiful people with wind blowing in their hair. That's a peripheral route message. In a peripheral route message, you're not very motivated to pay attention, and these tend to lead to temporary changes. So if we take a look again at the central and peripheral routes of persuasion, we can note that the central route to persuasion consists of thoughtful consideration of the arguments, ideas, and content of the message. When a receiver is doing central processing, they are being an active participant in the process of persuasion. And central processing has two prerequisites. It can only happen when the receiver has both the motivation and the ability to think about the message and its topic. If the listener doesn't care about the topic of the persuasive message, then they'll almost certainly lack the motivation to do central processing. On the other hand, if the listener is distracted or has trouble understanding the message, then they'll lack the ability to do central processing. The peripheral route to persuasion happens when the listener decides whether to agree with the message based on other cues besides the strength of the arguments or ideas of the message. So, for example, a listener might decide to agree with a message because the source appears to be an expert or is attractive. Think of advertisements where you've seen those types of sources. The peripheral route also happens when a listener is persuaded because they notice that the message has many arguments, but lack the ability or motivation to think about them individually. So in other words, peripheral cues like source expertise or credibility or many arguments in one message, they're a shortcut. I don't want to or can't think carefully about these ideas in the persuasive message, but it's a fair gamble to go ahead and agree with the message if the source appears to be knowledgeable or if there are many arguments in support of the message. This route occurs when the audience is unable or unwilling to engage in much thought on the message. Receivers engaged in peripheral processing are more passive than those doing central processing. If I'm giving you a message about texting and driving, I can give you data and facts, and you might see this kind of thing in a public announcement. Another example is the peripheral route message that you see here with Beyonce. In this example, there's not a lot of information. There's just a celebrity, Beyonce, and there's a Pepsi logo, but there's not an actual Pepsi in this ad. That's all that you need. So when you're looking at advertisements, pay attention to how the advertiser is trying to persuade you. Is it central or is it peripheral? Now, if you're going to be thinking about it carefully, then using the central root is best. And if you're not going to be thinking about it carefully as the potential audience, then the peripheral route is best. Those things in the periphery, outside of the actual thing you're trying to advertise, are what you will see in peripheral advertisements. So, what have you learned? You learned about the elaboration likelihood model. And you learned that this is an approach to persuasion that depends upon how people are thinking about your argument. You also learned that there are two routes to persuasion, both the peripheral and central routes to persuasion. You learned that each of these can have a different effect and that the central route can have a longer lasting effect, but that this is not the route that we should use when people are unmotivated or when they don't have the knowledge or ability to understand our message. So why should we know about this? Well, this isn't only useful for us if we want to understand how advertisers target us. It's also useful for us as individuals as we try to persuade other people, whether it be individually in conversation or professionally. As always, if you have any questions after watching this video or after reading your textbook, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I look forward to seeing each of you online.